Segment 3 is a walkthrough of Section 4 of the BRE-SPAD NOFO in order to highlight content needed for select application documents. This is the BRE-SPAD NOFO, PAR 24-268. Most of what I'll show you is Section 4, just some highlights. But first, I want to point out what I've been mentioning in the other segments is it's important to look for related notices. These are going to be listed at the top section of the NOFO. So if you're using a NOFO that you've saved as a PDF some time ago because you want to highlight it or make notes on it, or you're printing it out on paper, make sure that you check back to see if there's been any notices published since the time you downloaded the NOFO. You can always check live on the NOFO itself. Another thing you can do is subscribe to the NIH guide, and you'll get an email once a week with all the new NIH funding opportunities, other notices that are published, other policies, etc. Some notices are published before the NOFO because they're very broad, so they may have instructions there. And as I mentioned before, another reason to check the NOFO for notices and other live updates would be if the forms version changes for the SF424 application guide, but I'll also show you where to find that in the NOFO. So as mentioned, I'm going to mostly look at Section 4 here, which is application and submission information. So first you'll see there's another place you could access the SF424 through this hyperlink here. Again, you'll go to that web page and make sure you're using the correct forms version. I've already shown you in a prior segment that you can, through that link or directly here, you can see the page limits for general NIH applications. However, the NOFO may vary. And a great example is the research strategy for BRE-SPAD can be up to 30 pages, but you are not required to do so. And I also showed you in the previous segment of this video, we have on the BRE-SPAD webpage a list of major components and their page limits for BRE-SPAD. So again, I won't be going over this entire thing, just some highlights for you. Of course, you have to read the NOFO for the complete information and the SF424. I do want to point out first that for the title, we ask you to use a specific title, BRE-SPAD at, and then the name of the applicant organization. Scrolling down, another thing I'll point out is everyone will have to attach a plan for enhancing diverse perspectives in the other attachment section. This here in the NOFO describes what you need. There's examples, and there's also a website where you can see further information and more examples. Next, I'm going to show a little bit about the R&R budget section for BRE-SPAD. Here in the NOFO, we have a lot of specific information that applies just to BRE-SPAD. For instance, we give you examples of who might be other personnel. Here in Part C, equipment description, this is important information for anyone that is interested in requesting BRE-SPAD funding to purchase equipment to be used in biomedical research. So while we don't limit the total amount, only up to $75,000 can be requested towards any single piece of equipment. Requests for general use equipment, such as autoclaves, hoods, refrigerators, that are going to be broadly shared are allowed. But if you would like to request single user equipment, that would need to come in through the pilot research project funding, which you would not detail in this application. We define single user equipment for items for at least 75% of the total time is used by a single research team. That means one faculty member and say the students or staff researchers that work with that faculty member. Next is travel. The only thing I want to point out here is that all applicants should include in this budget line funding to request an annual in-person BRE-SPAD meeting. BRE-SPAD is a cooperative agreement, which I've mentioned in the program overview video, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later here. But we ask that everyone include some funding and travel for that in-person meeting. Okay, participant and trainee support costs. This is generally not applicable, but wages for students doing research could be included in pilot research project funding if applicable. Now, in the other direct costs section, we have a lot of examples and some limitations for some of your other direct costs. There are several types of other direct costs that you'll see in the SF 424. We only have information for the most part about materials and supplies. These are some of the allowable costs. But this is not exhaustive. This just gives you a sense of what some of the types of funding could be used for, but does not include everything that would be allowed. So you can read through these. Some that are a little bit less commonly seen in some of the NIH programs are, for instance, equipment service contracts for up to 5 years may be included in your budget, but this must be paid during the period of the BRE-SPAD award. That's one example. Another thing to point out is that you have the potential to request funding for items normally treated as F&A or indirect or cost. This could be general office supplies, for example. That would normally be F&A costs or indirect costs, but this would need to be strongly justified in your budget justification section. Some of you will have to do the subaward budget if you are proposing to have a subaward, but that certainly would not necessarily be all the applicants. Okay, moving on from budget, I'm now going to move over to the PHS 398 research plan form, which, as I mentioned in the prior segment, has a lot of the meat of your application, but certainly not everything. You saw in the previous segment that the SF 424 has directions for the specific aims, but here in the NOFO, we are asking you to give us a little bit more specific information here that is relevant to BRE-SPAD. So this is yet another example of the NOFO will have something in addition or more specific than the SF 424. I've already mentioned the research strategy in the prior sections where you are not using the content instructions in the application guide. You are going to use what we have here in the NOFO, which we break down into 11 different sections or subsections, and we ask that you use these headings in your application. You have up to 30 pages for that, and on our web page, we have suggested page links to help you get a ballpark sense of how you may want to break this down, but you do not have to adhere to those. Everyone will do an organizational assessment, and we have broken this into 2 sections, an overview and then biomedical research environment. We ask that you provide the information here, but you are able to provide additional information because remember, you're not limited as to how long this subsection needs to be. But keep in mind the purpose of this section is for reviewers to get a sense of what your current research or biomedical research capacity is in order to see whether what you propose in the application is appropriate. We realize, as discussed in the program overview video, that eligible institutions will be at different current stages, have different goals in terms of biomedical research capacity. So this helps the reviewers get a sense of your institutions. Number 2 is the need for proposed programming. Really, this is your rationale. Why do you need BRE-SPAD funding? Also, as discussed in the program overview video, this relates to one of the funding priorities for BRE-SPAD. BRE-SPAD is not designed to free up organizational funds. The goal is for BRE-SPAD to support activities that would not be possible without this award. So this is one of the places that you will discuss what your barriers are to increasing your biomedical research capacity and why you need BRE-SPAD funding for that. What challenges do you plan on addressing? Next, you have impact to contributing to broad participation in the biomedical research workforce. You can read about that, of course. Then 4 is innovation. Keep in mind here, we're defining innovation in a different way that is specific to BRE-SPAD. You're not required to invent new protocols or activities or completely new happenings. But here, innovation is the creation or adaptation of sustainable and effective processes or products related to biomedical research capacity. Okay, you'll state goals. 5. 6 are the funding areas. So applications should include, again, at least 2 of the funding areas below. So some of you will have 6A and 6B or 6A and 6C, etc. At least 2 of the 3. You are perfectly welcome to propose all 3. It's just a minimum of 2, but you certainly can propose all 3. There is no inherent better or worse approach in terms of what's more likely to be funded. You should propose what meets your organizational assessments and the needs that you have. Okay, so if you apply to Sponsored Programs Administration Development Funding, this would be 6A. In the NOFO, we have examples here of some of the activities that you could propose, but this is not exhaustive. These activities can be in pre and post-award function. They could be related to grants, contracts, fundraising, development, tech transfer, for instance. It could include partnerships, personnel. However, if you do include personnel, you do want to have a plan to sustain the personnel should they be needed past the duration of the award. You're welcome to propose a sponsored programs internship program or staff training, plans to acquire or update technology or policies and procedures, etc. And of course, with each of the funding areas, you'll talk about how this would be sustained beyond the BRE-SPAD funding cycle. Research environment funding is a second area you could apply for. Again, these are examples, but this list is not exhaustive. As I mentioned with the budget, research equipment and supplies could be proposed. For instance, these could improve curriculum related to biomedical research. It could be for research programs. You will describe what your intentions are. This can be enhancements to encourage student research. This can be involving training of student researchers or mentoring them in research. This can also involve faculty development, faculty research development, faculty training in grant writing or support in grant writing or research design, etc. Again, these are just examples, and it can include events or activities such as a campus research symposia. The third area is pilot research project funding. This area works differently than the other 2 areas. So if you're interested in this, we suggest you check out the short video we have on pilot research project funding. The bottom line is that in this application, you will describe what we have here, the general types of research, the qualification of investigators, or the individuals that would manage the program, how you would recruit investigators, what they would submit, how you will review them, how you would select them, how you'll evaluate the outcomes, etc. And then if you get a BRE-SPAD award and you've proposed this area of funding, once your BRE-SPAD award is active, then you would submit to NIH details about the specific research projects that you have selected that will be taking place from BRE-SPAD funding. So it's sort of a two-part process, and we do not want you to include the specific research projects in this application. You're using the NOFO information here to describe the general program. And again, check out that video. So the next section 7 here is something that everyone will include: faculty, staff, and student time for BRE-SPAD implementation. So whether you have faculty, staff, and or students involved in what you propose, based on your organizational assessment, here you're going to describe the changes that you need to make in order to enable the participation of the faculty, staff, and or students in what you propose. This is a really important part of the application as well, because you may recall from the program overview video or from reading the first section of the NOFO that one of the funding priorities for BRE-SPAD means that even if an application reviews well, proposals that do not have adequate, sufficient time for faculty, staff, and students to engage in what they propose will be a low funding priority. Even with a fantastic score, if this aspect is not well met, those applications are unlikely to be funded, because we are aware that many of the organizations that apply for BRE-SPAD, because you are resource limited institutions, resource limited often means time limited. So we need to see what the plans are that you have to make sure that the faculty and the students and staff will be able to undergo what you propose. Okay, Section 8 may be optional. If you have multiple participating organizations, then you would include that. Section 9 is structure and governance. Everyone will include this. As mentioned previously, BRE-SPAD it's actually not a grant, it is a cooperative agreement. That means NIH has substantial programmatic involvement during performance of the activities. And this is described more detailed in Section 6 of the NOFO. And you'll also see in Section 6 more information about the steering committee. This was touched upon in the program overview video, in the sense that every BRE-SPAD awardee will need to form a steering committee, and there are certain types of members you'll have to have, which are described in Section 6 and summarized briefly in program overview video. That steering committee will include an NIH staff member that we will assign to you. Also in your structure and governance section, you will describe mentors for each of your PD, program director, or PI, principal investigator. Every BRE-SPAD awardee will need to have mentors for their PD and their PIs that are from a non-participating organization. Ideally, the mentor is employed at an organization with a level of biomedical research capacity similar to what you're seeking to attain. They will be members of the steering committee, and these are the only members of the steering committee that we expect you to name in the application. Okay, everyone will have number 10, evaluation plan and timeline. You'll read about there. Everyone will have number 11, an overall sustainability plan. Remember, you've already talked about sustainability for each of the funding areas you're seeking in section 6. Here you're going to tie everything together. And knowing that it's possible to have up to 10 years of BRE-SPAD funding, but not guaranteed, your sustainability plan should not be reliant on future funding, and it should not rely on indirect funds or F&A costs from future grants that you haven't been awarded yet. That will not suffice for your overall sustainability plan. So those are the 11 sections of the research strategy. Excuse me. And next are letters of support. So everyone will have at least one letter of support, and that one is the organizational eligibility and commitment letter. This needs to come from a senior organizational official, a president, a provost, or someone else with organization-wide responsibility from the participating organization or organizations. Here you see the information that you should include here in this letter. And it needs to be signed by this senior official from each participating organization. Now, while everyone will have this letter, many of you will have additional letters. We hope that you will have letters of support from those mentors for the PDPIs that you have identified, which I just discussed. You aren't required to have these letters, but you are encouraged to. And if you are applying to the pilot research project funding area, we also encourage you to include letters from your faculty who are interested in applying to this program should it end up existing. You may have other letters of support as long as you follow the general guidelines. And it's important to note, as described in the application guide, that all your letters should be uploaded as one PDF. Compile all your letters together into one document. All right, next would be the resource sharing plan. Everyone will have to include a resource sharing plan. However, this has changed in the recent months, and the resource sharing plan now is limited to describing how you would share model organisms that you would be developing or working with, and any research tools. So that means for probably many, if not most, BRE-SPAD applicants, those resources would be not applicable. And if that's the case, in this document, you still need to include it, but you just explain why this does not apply to your BRE-SPAD program. All right, another plan that everyone must include is the data management and sharing plan. You'll notice here that the resource sharing plan is one document, and over in the other plan section of the application forms, you'll include the data management and sharing plan. Again, everyone will need to include this, and in the NOFO here, you can see that depending on what you're proposing, we give you some guidelines for what to include there. So this is another good example of where the instructions in the application guide must be followed, but alone, that is not enough for BRE-SPAD, so we include some additional information here to help you figure that out. Finally, the appendix. Most of you are unlikely to have an appendix, but if you do, please make sure you follow all the instructions in the application guide. There are only certain types of items you can have in the appendix. If you include something you're not supposed to have, your application would be withdrawn and not reviewed, so you have a 0 chance of funding. So again, you're reading the SF 424 application guide. You're reading the NOFO here, the BRE-SPAD NOFO, where the NOFO is different than the application guide. You follow the NOFO, and you're also checking for the related notices. If they are different than the NOFO, then you follow the notices. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. That concludes this segment.